Hello friends, welcome to the channel. Hello friends, welcome to the channel. Lesson we will discuss context in React.js. Okay, so what is the context and how we use and implement React.js and what are the things in function component and class component to use the context. Okay, so basically what happens, let's suppose an example in which we have multiple components which is nested in one another, and we want to flow some data from the parent component to the last one child. Okay, so what we have to do for that? For that we have to pass the props. Okay, from one component to another, then another to third one to third to last. Okay, but the use of that props data is only for the last one, and inside the middle one layer, no one is using that data, but they have to pass that props inside with them. Okay, so we have written some example. So basically, we will first create a page simple called context. So here, what we will do, we will show you some example where the scenario. Here in this page, we have pasted some example. Okay, we will show that what is the example, and this is using the use state hook. So we will add that hook. Okay. Now we are on the stack grid, so it needs some React fragment. So we will write React dot fragment. So we have five components here. Okay. You can see all components are nested within each other. Okay. So every error is gone, and here you can see we have five components: one, two, three, four, and five. Okay, and component one is calling the component two. Similarly, component two is calling the component three. So on, component five is being called by component four. Okay. So what is happening? Here we are using this user data, okay, and this data is, you can see it is flowing from from component one. Okay, here you can see we are setting the props for the component two, and component two is receiving as props, and again it is sending forward to component three. Similarly, component three is receiving and then forwarding it to four. Similarly, 4 is taking and forwarded to 5, and 5 is now using this data. So what happened here is only the 5 components which is nested. Okay. So if you have multiple components, let's suppose 50 plus components are there which are nested, and you want to flow some data, then you have to write like this. Okay. So this is the tough thing to manage. Okay. So for that, we will have to use the context concept here. So what context say that you just create some context and provide this that to any parent component. Let's suppose we want to provide that context to this component one, so that that context data will be available for each and every component. You don't need to be passed each and every component. Whenever the data will be have to be used, you just call that context and use them. Okay, so in the similar example, what we will do, we will just place it on the app file so that it will print. So we have to basically export it. We are just exporting default, and here we will importing it component context. Okay. So here you can see after placing it, all are printing component 1 up to component 5, and in component 1 we are printing hello user, so it is printing hello that's all, and in the last one we are using the hello user again. Okay, so it is also printing hello just all again, so that user data is flowing from top to bottom. Now what we will do, we are just uh, making the header h5. Okay, now you can see what is the context and how to use that. So first of all, we have to create the context. Okay. So context is always created outside any component. So it is not the part of any component, either functional component or class component. So here we will create a constant. Let's suppose constant. We have a user context, then create user context equal to, we have to use the React dot create context. Okay, and you can pass some default data here. You can see it is asking for some default value. Okay, let's suppose RAM. Okay, now first step is done. Step one, this is the step one, create a context, and it should be outside any class component or function component. So directly we will write any component outside any component. So first step is done. Now we have to call it as a provider, or we will wrap a component with the user context provider. Okay, so let's suppose we want to wrap this component so that every uh, component inside that will receive that data. So component 2 is calling here, being calling here. We will just wrap this component 2. So how we will wrap? We will use this user context. This will have three things: consumer, provider, and display name. So we are going to use this provider right now. So basically this context will provide, and here it will take some value. Here let's suppose we will have some value that is user, this one. So we will want to print this value. So we are passing this state value here, and we will wrap this. So this will be user context of provider. So here you can see we have wrapped the data, wrapped the context to this component. So every component inside this component, or this component as well, will receive this data from the context provider. Okay, so we don't have to write this. Okay, so we have to remove this app from every layer. There is no need of that one. Okay, so every layer we have removed. So for this we have to provide right now. So later we come to that point. Now what will happen? We have created the step 2. This is the step 2. Wrap any current component with context provider. So the name suggests that it is the provider, so it will provide something to the component. Okay. Now the third step is to consume this data. Okay, this context data. How can we have to use? So here in this scenario, we have the function components everywhere. So for the function component, there is a hook called use context. Okay, so you have to use that use context. So you can also import it from like this here, use context. This is the hook with the help of which you will going to access that data. So how you will access? You have to write this one here. Let's suppose user is equal to use context, and you will have to pass the same context that is called user context. Okay. So here you can see now this user is getting the data just all, okay, which has been provided from this provider. With the help of this provider, we are sending this data to every component, okay, and every component is getting the same data, and you will get access this context data with the help of use context hook if you are using the function component. Okay, so this is the example to consume. So this is the step 3, how to consume context data. So up to this it is clear how to use it within the function component. Now let's suppose we have a class component. So how we will call that context? So for that we will write a class called component. It will extend some features from React component. Okay, and we have some constructor here. It accepts super. We'll call this super constructor. Now we will pass some render, and render will return some JSX. Okay, so let's suppose we will have to use this one. So we will return this one, and it is component 6. Hello again in component in class. Okay, we are using the same. Now what we will do, we will call this component very nested in. Now it is saying user is no different. It is here. So this is the class component, and now how we will access it text. So for that we have two things here. First one you can use like this const, and you will override some context type here. Text type text type. We will set the value here as user context. So this here. So this is the context type equal to. So if you want to search, so this is the context type, static context type which we have to use to set the context. So it is basically from the your parent component. Now this will have your data, and you will have to write the data, or you have to print it here. Okay. So how will you have to print? For that you will have this dot context type. So this time you will not have to write the type, because this is the getter method, and getter method is this context only. Okay. So here you will see component 6 is printing, and hello JS again in class. That means you are getting the data inside this context. So this is also present inside this. Okay. So this is the context type is to set the context, and control F you will have to find this dot context. So see, here is the example. This dot context inside this React. as you can see. Okay. If set, this context will be set as runtime to current value to be input. That means you will get the context value from this dot context. Okay, so this is also example of a class component. So how can you can consume the context inside the class component? So either you can set the context type from inside using the static context type, and you will set this context. And the second way is to define after the class creation. So you can easily write component 6 dot context type equal to user context. So this will also work the same, and you will get the exact data here. Okay. So this was the simple example to use the context inside the class component. So in this session we have discussed how to use the both as a function component and inside the class component. So in summary, what we have done, in the step 1 we have just created a context outside any component. In example, we have created a user context, and we have used the method called CreateContext, which is from the part of React. Okay. Now the second step is to wrap inside the provider. So we have wrapped the component to inside the user context dot provider and passed from value here, and value is from this state. Okay. So we are passing this data. Now the third step is to consume. So we are consuming inside this function component. So for that, if it is the functional component, we have to call the useContext hook, and we will set that hook inside context inside this hook, and we will get the reference. From that reference, we will print our data. So if it is the class component, we have two ways to set the value of context. First one is a static context type, and we will set the context. Another way is to call the class name dot context type and set the context. And the use is by using the this dot context only. You will get the data of context inside this context. Okay. So this is the example of context. So there are one more scenario, like if you want to use multiple context inside the same component. So we will discuss that thing in our next coming session. Okay. So how you will use the multiple providers, and what is the use of this consumer. So we will use the use of this consumer one. Okay. So in this session we will have discussed only the basic one. Okay. So coming session we will discuss the how to use the multiple provider, and with the help of consumer we will consume the data. Also you can also change the context data, okay, from anywhere. So that also we will discuss in the next session. So thanks for watching this session. Stay tuned for the coming next session.